MediaWeekPodcast.com with James Manning and Brendan Wood. We're on iTunes, Facebook and Twitter at MediaWeek AUS.
Okay, special Media Week podcast today with James Manning and myself, Brendan Wood. We first of all, we'll let you listen to this audio. Went to air on 2GB, which is the News Talk radio station in Sydney, at about 11:30 this morning.
Hello, Helen.
Hello, Ray. Good morning.
Good morning, Helen.
Look, I won't keep you long.
That's
I just
okay.
wanted to say thank you and 2GB for the wonderful opportunities and the experience my lovely boy Joel has had over the last
No, Helen. This isn't Mrs. Labi, is it?
It is.
And your little tin soldier's going away.
Yeah, and I'm a bit of a blubbering mess today.
Oh,
Isn't it
no.
ridiculous?
Don't do that. You'll make me cry. He'll come back.
Oh, I hope so. He'll miss all the free dinners he gets.
Oh, dear.
I'm sure he will.
Well, you know what you're doing, Helen? You're reflecting on what many mothers go through
Yes.
when their babies, and even though he's a man,
Yeah.
when their babies decide that they need to go elsewhere and
That's right.
embark on new adventures. And he's going to New
that's
York, and we
right.
wish him the best of luck. But obviously,
And I know I've embarrassed him, and that's what mothers do.
No, I'm just watching him in reflection now. He's got his head banging the desk in front of him. He's fine, Helen, so don't worry about it. And the good news is he'll be out of the country shortly.
Anyway, I'll still be listening in. And,
Well, I'd expect you to,
look,
because he might end up back here.
well, that's right. I have to keep loyalty there.
All
And
right.
we just want to wish him good luck and tell him how proud we are of him. And thanks again for all your support.
No worries. Well, he'll be doing his last presentation with me in a few minutes, and then
That's right.
and
And
then
I'll
he's-
be a blubbering mess. But
Well-
that's all right, too.
you got the Kleenex handy?
I have.
Well, don't be embarrassed. I love mums who are proud of their children. You're obviously very proud of your son.
Very.
Good on you.
Anyway, thanks, Ray. All the best.
I've just been told by his boss that he's currently gone red and hiding under the desk.
Well, that was the whole meaning behind the phone call.
Good on you, Mum.
See ya.
See you, Helen.
Bye.
All the best, love. That's Joel's mum. And mums are entitled to do that. It's just the way life is, Joel. You just have to wear it, mate. Don't be tough on her. Don't be tough on her.
You know, one of the great advantages of Radio Ray, and you know this better than anyone, is that you're a voice. You can bluff your way through, you can present yourself as being a lot older and a lot more mature than you actually are.
That's right. Everyone will think that you're like the Walter Cronkite of the newsroom, a bloke in his 50s or 60s, you know, and, you know, very much independent. And then...
My mother has sold me out.
Then you're a fresh-faced young boy, actually, and Mum comes on and does that. But anyway, the rules are these on this program, anyway. I accommodate mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers who wish to share with me stories about their children and grandchildren, and usually they're good things, and that's not such a bad thing that Mum's going to miss you.
No, not at all.
So when do you leave?
I leave on Wednesday,
Next
the
week?
19th.
Okay, and you go to try and make your fame and fortune in New York, they tell me, is that correct?
Yeah, look, take a punt over in the Big Apple, Ray. It's something that I've wanted to do for some time. I've been with 2GB now almost 8 years. In June it'll be 8 years. So the opportunity has now come up. I guess I'll go over and try to secure some work with one of the big American companies over there, and hopefully still do some work for 2GB in Sydney as well, should anything major happen over there. And it is New York, so I'm imagining that this won't be the last time that they'll accept any reports that I do for them. But everyone tends to end up back here at some stage or another in their career, and hopefully that'll be me down the track as well. But
all right. Well, I applaud young people chasing dreams and ambitions, and therefore I applaud you and what you're doing, and I wish you the very best, and thank you for your contribution you made to the program over a long period of time. You better do your one final report for us before you farewell us.
One final report, and I just want to thank you as well, Ray, and to your team as well, who've been nothing but professional, and the time that I've worked, and even during our time in London, that was a true example of how people can work together under immense pressure. And I learnt so much from you, from Michael Thompson, and throughout the years that I've been here as well, from Alan's team, Chris, Ben, etc., everyone here. It's been an absolute pleasure, so thank you very much for accommodating me. Now, one final time, axe killer Matt Milat's appeal against his 43-year sentence has been dismissed, but his accomplice Cohen Klein has had his penalty reduced. A teenage girl is in a critical condition after being hit by a car at Baralla in Western Sydney. A court has heard how former Speaker Peter Slipper has been in and out of mental health facilities while facing charges for misusing taxpayer money, and Ukraine's leaders are calling on Russia to negotiate an end to the regional crisis as Crimea votes to decide on whether to adopt Kremlin rule. In sport, Cronulla prop Andrew Fafita claims the game has gone soft after he was wiped out for 2 matches for a shoulder charge. In Sydney today, partly cloudy, the chance of some showers and storms in the west, mainly this afternoon and again tonight. Tops of 28 in the city, 29 in the west, right now in town 25 degrees. And Ray, one last time, more news in 26 minutes.
Well done, Joel, and Godspeed and have a wonderful journey.
And we have Joel Labi on the phone now. It's his final day at 2GB. Normally we have an old fuddy-duddy retiring from radio, and we'll talk to them. But today it's a young guy. He's in his 20s. He's been reading the breakfast news for Alan Jones at 2GB for quite a number of years now. How are you going, Joel?
I'm a little bit sad, I must admit. I never thought that this day would actually come.
And how many years were you at 2GB?
Let's say 7 3/4. I think from June of this year would have rounded out the 8 years. So it's been quite a remarkable journey, and probably a little bit rare in the media to stay at one place for so long.
And the number one thing about you, Joel, is your age. Like, people listen to you read, or have been listening to you read the news for Alan Jones and Ray Hadley in the morning, and you sound a lot older than what you are. Can you just tell people your age?
If you must know, I'm going to reveal the cards here. I'm 26 as of November last year.
He's a baby.
It's true. It's true, but that's the great beauty of radio, though, isn't it? That you can almost bluff your way through. You can come over with a veil of secrecy. Nobody really knows exactly how old you are, but they can picture you in there. I've had a few people who I've met recently who said, "Oh, geez, I pictured you with grey hair, a couple of kids, maybe a pack-a-day smoker, something like that." So it's quite flattering, to be honest with you. But no, 26 is where I'm at right now.
Joel, we'll ask you about how you got your start there, but have you asked yourself many times this week, do I really know what I'm doing, giving up this this pretty dream job, I guess, at the one of the strongest radio stations in Australia?
I've been asking myself for the last few months whether or not I've made the right decision, to be honest with you. But look, it's something, this new chapter is something that I've wanted to do for some time. But look, I've had a very, very good run here, and I've been on Alan's program for 5 years and Ray's program for about 2 consistently. And there comes a time, I suppose, where you need to progress. You need to get some other experience outside of it, and I love 2GB, and I wouldn't have stayed here that long if I didn't. And I figured the only way to go and better myself as a broadcaster, as a reporter, as a journalist, was to go overseas and go somewhere, because I honestly couldn't see myself working for another station. And as hard as it was to bite the bullet and actually throw in the towel, I'm quite happy I did in a way, because I know that eventually one day, if it comes to it, I can come back here and offer so much more than what I've got at the moment.
And Joel, when you first took on the gig, did Alan Jones come to you and tell you his expectations of a newsreader?
He didn't, actually. I still remember the first morning that I started with him, and I was 21 when I started, and got into work at about 5 in the morning, introduced myself, and I'm pretty sure I was trembling at the time, because I'd only ever met Alan once in the hallway before, and before I knew it, I had to anchor his program. He just said, "All the best and good luck. I'll let you know if you stuff up." That's the sort of philosophy that we've gone with, and thankfully we've had a pretty good relationship for the last 5 years or so, and the fewer confrontations, the better, I suppose. And then, look, it's been great working with him. You learn a lot. It goes that old saying, I think, that if they won't say if you're doing anything right, but you'll certainly know if you're doing something wrong, and that was the case. Of course, we've had a couple of instances where he's picked me up, but with all due respect to him, I think his knowledge of the English language, for instance, and pronunciations and things like that have certainly helped my career as well, because there were things that I was saying incorrectly that he would come in and go, "Right, you need to fix this up right now." And when you listen back to yourself, you think, "Jesus, how long have I been doing that for?" So definitely beneficial.
And tell me, was it ever a blow to your ego when Alan Jones might be interviewing, say, the Prime Minister at 7:15 a.m. and he chooses to just push through the 7:30 news bulletin and continue interviewing the Prime Minister?
It's a touchy subject, the 7:30 news, but I think it's Alan's program, and if he has the Prime Minister on, I think his listeners will probably pay him the courtesy of allowing him to go on with whatever issues needs to. There are times where you scratch your head and think, why is he dumping the news here? But, at the end of the day, it is his program and he can do what he wants, essentially. But that's only been the last few years or so, where I say it really become noticeable. But I think after a few meetings with us and with listeners, and we've kind of got a better balance as to when to drop the bulletins and when not to. But we still go out to plenty of other network stations at 7:30 though, and thankfully a few of the listeners have picked up on that, because they'll tune in for the news and then tune back into Alan as well.
Joel, we certainly want to find out what's next for you, and want to hear a little bit about the Macquarie Radio newsroom. But first off, just tell us, how did you get your start?
I got my start here at 18. I was in my first semester of university. I was studying journalism at UTS, and came in to do a week's work experience here. And the man of the moment, who was actually working as a news director and a presenter, was Jason Morrison. And for people who know him and know how amazing he is with young people who just want to start, I pulled him aside at the end of the week and said, look, I'm really enjoying myself here. Can I keep coming back? And he said, mate, you can come in when you want. Just you don't even have to give us a heads up. Just turn up at reception, we'll let you in. That started throughout the week and then would come in on weekends. And this went on for about 5 or 6 months. And I developed a really good rapport with people in the newsroom. And some of the senior journos have taken me under their wings and just showing me how to write, how to read the news, how to edit scripts, etc. And just by sheer luck, there were a few people that had left within 5 or 6 weeks of each other, and they needed someone quickly who knew how to work the system and was pretty much set in their ways in the newsroom. So before I knew it, at the age of 18, they're putting a contract under my nose and asking me if I wanted to become a cadet. And I could not believe it, because when I asked Jason only a few months earlier, what does it take to work at Sydney's #1 station, he says, mate, you've got a whole another kettle of fish to deal with there. You're going to have to go out to the country. You'll have to get all this experience and then eventually come back to us. So you can only imagine, with that opportunity on the table, I could not quite believe that this was happening. And I guess from there, the rest is history, because I've stayed here for that long now.
And the thing about your news bulletin, it's quite important, and the reason why it's important is because the station rates #1 on the AM band and rates #1 overall, and because of that you get a lot of leads, whether it's through the programming of Alan Jones and Ray Hadley, or whether it's just because of tip-offs, very much like 3AW gets in Melbourne, and I suppose like the ABCs in Sydney and Melbourne. And because you get those leads, you guys are being monitored, and your news broadcasts, because you're on air for 6 hours every morning, or you were for 5 days a week, you're being monitored by all the other major outlets like 7, 9, 10, the ABC, other FM stations, including the newspapers as well. So were you aware of the importance of each bulletin?
I think it came to fruition probably a little bit later on in my career here, because you don't quite understand how wide-ranging the bulletins are and how many people listen to it. Especially, it's only when you meet journos out on the road at stories, but you've got the tip-off too, that they say, oh, well, I heard it on 2GB, I heard it on Ray's program, etc. And we work so closely with the programs as well that as soon as they get a tip-off, they're on the phone to us or running into our studio and saying, we've just got word of this, we'll call these guys. It's actually a very coordinated response with breaking news, especially with Jones and Hadley's show. I mean, those two shows, I suppose they set the benchmark for that sort of stuff, and it shows because there's such a wide respect among the media as well as to what we broadcast. And sure, it does give you a little bit more of authority, I guess, when you're broadcasting as well, to know that not only do you have your listeners to cater for, but you're actually broadcasting to a whole group of journalists who are waiting on your every word to find out where their next story is. So it's quite flattering in a way as well.
Mate, what were some of the early highlights for you?
I think the #1 highlight for me was the London Olympics in 2012. I got the opportunity to go over there with Ray Hadley and his commentary team as a reporter, and I have never worked harder in my life, and I don't think I've been more exhausted and having as much fun as that moment, it was a real eye-opener as to how hard some of those broadcasters work, not only in terms of the hours, but learning sports at the drop of a hat, learning names, broadcasting things that they had no idea about, but coming across as if they were patent experts in it. It was really a wonderful, wonderful experience, and I think that tops everything that I've done. I mean, I've covered a few elections and the leadership spills in Canberra, which have definitely been up there with the best. In London, by far and away, to be exposed to that. I mean, we're working 3 weeks straight for 16, 17 hours a day and just kept churning it out, and you develop a real appreciation for, you know, the likes of the Hadleys, the Joneses, the Chris Smiths, the Ben Fordhams, who work so hard and become so good at what they do. And then you try to feed off that, and all of a sudden you're running on 2 hours sleep, but you're all so energised because you want to deliver the best possible program you can.
Mate, was that part of a radio pool, or were you doing that just for 2GB?
No, that was just for 2GB. We paid for the broadcast rights. I think my reports were going out to other network stations like 2CH and our other networks that pick up the news bulletins. The broadcast, the actual commentary of the events was 2GB specific.
Mm-hmm. Mate, back in the early days when you were at university, did you ever see yourself as a news reader on an AM radio station, or did you see yourself doing TV or maybe newspapers?
You know, to be honest, when I first decided that I wanted to get into media, and I still maintain this, I've always wanted to be a broadcaster, you know, be like the Joneses and the Hadleys, etc. And I met the late Stan Zemanek when I was still at school just by chance, and he invited me to his studio. And ever since that night, I started listening to his show and just became hooked on AM radio. So when I started to get serious about it and thought about where the best place to do work experience would be, 2GB was the obvious choice. So I guess I never thought about becoming a newsreader per se. The idea was to become a journalist and then try to weasel into broadcasting some other way. But I guess it just so happened that one night they needed an extra person to read the overnight news, and I was the only one in the newsroom that was trained up to do it. So they threw me on air, and we went from there. But I guess it's funny how that kind of develops now. You've got to reconsider where your life's at after all that time.
Well, I've met you once at a function about 18 months ago at Darling Harbour, and I'd say you would go all right on TV because you're pleasing to the eye. Not that I'm a chick at all, but I would suggest that maybe you know TV could be an area you can go into, or online video. But awards in radio, one of the news reading journalists in radio who always picks up an award for best newsreader is Steve Blander over at 2UE. Have you ever won any radio industry awards?
No, the bastard keeps tipping me every year that I get nominated. No, but with all due respect to Steve, he is the benchmark and will be for probably until he retires. He is a brilliant, brilliant newsreader and thoroughly deserves that award as well. But, I mean, look, I'm under no illusions here. There is a big wide market in Sydney, and there are some outstanding newsreaders, not just on AM but on FM as well. I mean, you've got guys like Glenn Daniel and Ron Wilson on the ARN network here, and we're up against them. And these are guys with decades of experience, not just a handful of years like myself. So honestly, it's an honour to be competing against them. And it's a friendly competition in my eyes, at least. I don't take anything to heart, and I actually really enjoy listening to Steve's bulletins, and I tend to go back and have a listen to the stories that the opposition has run the other hour, and we'll listen to his bulletins in full because he's got such a beautiful reading voice and just smooth and very elegant when he ad-libs as well. So thoroughly deserving of those awards.
And see, some of those newsreaders you just rattled off are big names, like some of them in Melbourne as well, Tony Tardio and all of that. In markets like Brisbane, you don't necessarily have, you seem to have a sort of a higher rotation of news presenters on various FM and AM radio stations up there. Why do you think it is these guys with big names, whether it's Glenn Daniels or whether it's Ron Wilson
Now
and
it's
Steve
Smooth, I
Lander.
think,
Yeah, he's on Smooth. I think there's afternoons or something there. But why is it you think these guys they stick to it and do it for a long period of time on radio? I know Ron Wilson was doing 2GB at breakfast time and then doing Channel 10's 5 o'clock news on TV.
He was, yeah. That was an interesting time. I was actually working with him around that point. I think he just did it for the love of it, to be honest with you. I found from talking to him that he wanted a new challenge without giving up Channel 10, and somehow managed to come up with a work-life balance for both of them. As for the others, I'm not too sure, but I guess they're probably on decent wickets as well. Let's be honest, they're fantastic newsreaders, and the stations want to keep them. But I mean, the Sydney-Melbourne market are the two biggest markets in the country. So if you have nailed down a spot with any of the stations that is consistent and listened to, why would you want to give it up? I mean, am I an idiot? Tell me if I'm an idiot for doing what I'm doing. But you know what I mean, though. If you've got a great gig, it is. Especially, I'm still young compared to some of the guys in the industry. I suppose for them, it's also a matter of comfort as well. They can do what they do. They do it very well, and why give it up?
The interesting thing is that there's a lot of movement over at TUE at the moment. Is there also movement in their newsroom, or is it just their on-air lineup with their shows?
I think their newsroom is fairly stable at the moment, and I'm actually quite close with a lot of their newsroom, and their morale is quite high. They are a very good newsroom, and they certainly keep us on the ball as well. We wouldn't be monitoring them so much if we didn't have respect for them. And look, they have some brilliant reporters that have moved on in the past as well, and many that are still there, some that have gone and come back. So that is a testament to them as well, that they certainly know how to sniff out a story. The on-air side of things is probably out of their hands, I'm sure, with the constant lineup changes. I can imagine it would be quite disruptive. But in saying that, I think it's important with the newsroom that you try not to get caught up in any of those changes. I mean, even at 2GB a few years ago when we had changes in drive and in the evenings, etc. I mean, that created a lot of rumour and innuendo, and it was tough to deal with that because all of a sudden you get sucked into it. But they've somehow done well, I suppose, or maybe become immune to it, to distance themselves from that, and they still do a very good job at producing very good bulletins.
Breaking news story that stood out the most for you while you're on breakfast news at 2GB, would it be something like Michael Jackson's death?
I was just about to say Michael Jackson's death. I can still remember that morning like it was yesterday in 2009, and that was the first big story that had ever happened on my watch as well. And as you can imagine, I had absolutely no idea what to do in that sense because, my God, you've got the biggest star in the world dropping dead and you've got to deliver the bulletin. How do you do this without sounding nervous or... you've got to deliver it with some sort of authority, and I'm a 21-year-old pipsqueak at the time, so that definitely stands out. And I think, look, any major celebrity death, I would say, or personality death, I mean, Nelson Mandela at the end of last year is also one that sticks in my mind, and the Boston bombings as well. As that unfolded, that was a really harrowing experience to be covering. But there have been plenty of good ones as well, and I think the royal baby, even though I'm not the biggest fan of reporting the royal family, nothing against the monarchy at all, but just the daily paparazzi stories. But that and the new Pope being elected, which was enthralling because you're hooked on the TV, but you've got to read the news at the same time. So you've got one eye on the television to see what the developments are, and you're trying to read without sounding distracted. So there have been some great challenges, though, and all of those, I think those are probably my top five.
Joel, tell me, what's the how well resourced is the sort of Macquarie Radio News? You've probably got a fair idea of how some other news operations work.
Look, I would say we're very well resourced. We've got a great news team in Sydney. We've got two very capable reporters in Canberra, State Parliament Bureau as well, and of course we don't have any access to things. Reporters interstate per se, but we have networks that we exchange audio with, etc. So we're across everything that goes on interstate. Overseas, we've got access to the BBC, which is a service that we pay for, I believe, and CBS in the United States as well. They also have a wide range of reporters across Europe and Asia, and because we pay them for that service as well, we have access to everything that goes to air in their network as well. So it's actually, that's only come in the last year or so, and I've found that we've been across far more stories, far more comprehensively in international issues as well, because there are people on the ground in places like Ukraine, Egypt, etc., that we previously didn't have access to.
And tell me, what are the sort of hours when you were working the breakfast show? What time did you get in there, and what sort of a team would be there at the crack of dawn?
Right, well, I would get up at about 4 to be in at 5 a.m, which sounds horrible, but to media people, you know, if you can get in at 5 a.m. and leave by 1 p.m, then that is a pretty delicious shift you've got there. So that was, yeah, look, that's been my day for the last 5 and a bit years or so, 5 a.m. till 1 p.m. Shift. But by the time I get in, there's already a team of people in there. We've got an overnight journalist, the editor, who's been in there from about 3:30. He or she are going through the newspapers, already starting to write up. Our police reporter, if they're not out at the crime scene, will be in there. We've got a sports person as well. And so I'll come in and I start reading from 5:30, so I'll immediately start going through the next bulletin and discussing with my editor where we're going to take stories for the day. I'll start writing up copy as well, checking international wires to see what's going on overseas. And we tend to have a pretty good routine in the mornings as well as to who takes over what sort of stories. But by 6 o'clock on a good day, we'll have a full newsroom.
And just tell me about the run order of some of your stories that you've done over the last few years. Because 2GB is such a strong radio station in Sydney, but you do broadcast your news bulletin to some regional stations in New South Wales. And we've had some situations during the 5 o'clock hour in the morning where the M4 has had a massive accident on it, and it's funneling all this traffic in from Western Sydney, and it's totally gridlocked, it's blocked. And it becomes the number one story for the people of Sydney. Do you run that as the number one news story throughout the morning from 6 o'clock or 5:30 onwards, or do you hold it back until you're sort of hitting 7 a.m, 7:30? Because you have to keep in mind you're broadcasting to the whole state, not just to Sydney.
No, we would go with it immediately. I mean, of course, we have to keep in mind that there are stations outside of Sydney that do take our news, but we are a predominantly Sydney station. I mean, that's our major market. The ratings tell us that. We don't monitor how many people listen outside of Sydney per se, but I suppose our work environment is centred around what is going on in Sydney. And I can only imagine if there were traffic problems on the M4 and we weren't broadcasting that, and Alan goes on air and starts getting a mountain of calls from people stuck in traffic there, we have an obligation to report it. Of course, sometimes it can be, you know, a bit of a mind-boggler to people outside of Sydney as to why we would be leading with a traffic incident. But, I mean, we've got 500,000 people in breakfast tuning in, and I'd say 98% from the Sydney CBD or Sydney metro area at least. So we have a duty to tell them what's going on as well, and vice versa as well. I mean, if there's a major accident or you know, something massive going on in rural New South Wales, we're not about to ignore that either. And you know, even predominantly during Ray's program, for instance, we may very well be putting those sorts of stories up because there's more of a market. He broadcasts to more network stations outside of Sydney, so there's more of an interest to take those sorts of stories on.
Joel, does the timing of the news bulletin change across the day on 2GB, the time devoted to the news?
Yes, it does. So during breakfast, it's a 4-minute bulletin that includes news, finance and sport. The weather is done separately. After that, it goes out to a 5-minute bulletin where that's during the Ray Hadley program, where it's a timed-out 5-minute bulletin. So that's 3.5 minutes of news, a minute of sport, and 30 seconds of weather, roughly. These are just rough figures there. The midday bulletin then is an 8-minute bulletin that's timed out. So that's 6.5 minutes of news and 1.5 minutes of sport. But they're pretty easy to manage, though. I mean, you get into the routine of knowing what exactly, you know, how much you can fit in each bulletin there. It's much harder in breakfast because you've got less time and usually more's happening.
Hey, a question for you. I was listening to today's 2GB breakfast program on logger tape just before I bolted in here at a Media Week, and I noticed on most occasions, like Alan Jones, for example, you'll read the news at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. You don't actually hear Alan's voice again because there might be a heavy commercial ad log being run on the show. You don't hear him again until 10 past the hour, which means that you have to sit through quite a lot of ads to sort of, eventually read your weather on the air as such, because you'll read the news, the sport and the finance, go to an ad break, and then after the break you come back with your weather. Do you actually sit there and wait until 8 minutes past the hour or 9 minutes past the hour to read the weather, or do you just dump it into the system and then jump out of the studio and start chasing more?
No, it's all done live. All done live. We sit and we wait. We be patient, but usually I'm sitting there and either in a 2-minute window, either just flick onto Sky News or CNN or something and see what's going on, or going through the Wires service and seeing if there are any other stories generating. I don't know if anybody else does that, but I can't sit still while I'm there. I've got to be doing something there, otherwise I'll just twiddle my thumbs and flick a microphone on by accident. I could have been fired a long time ago if I did that.
Now, you would have heard the stories like I've heard about Bob Carr, the former Premier of New South Wales, when he was opposition leader and also when he was Premier. He would become Mr. Dial-A-Quote. It was the first thing he'd do every morning. He'd dial into all the newsrooms, the radio newsrooms, and he would give his key quotes of the day, and I'm talking like at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then off he would go and be the Premier, Mr. Premier for the day. First of all, have you heard those stories? And secondly, what is the current Premier of New South Wales doing, Barry O'Farrell? Is he phoning in with his dial-a-quotes?
I would say with Bob Carr, I know exactly what you're talking about because I've chatted to him a few times when he's called into the newsroom back when he was Foreign Minister in the Labor government. And yes, he would call in, Bob Carr here, this is your lead. The Foreign Minister is attending a meeting in Syria. And he would just go and give his grabs, and then you would try to question him, and he'd go, "Oh, we've got to go," and just hang up on you. Wow. He was a fascinating character, but there were stories about him. There are stories that are still doing the rounds that we tell our younger people that come in as well, that yes, there are politicians that will call in and try to write the story for you. As for Barry O'Farrell, I found him, I actually really like Barry as a person. I've known him for some time just through his work as opposition leader, because he was in that role for so long, and you just come to meet people and get to know his staff as well as the former premiers as well. And he was always very accommodating and just a very nice person. He'll call in. He does have a soft spot for 2GB, though, I must admit, because when he calls in, sometimes he does know a few of the people by name because of the continuous call team for the New South Wales listeners on the weekend. So he'll ask how a certain person is going or what may be, but he's just as accessible, I would say. And look, most of them are quite easy to talk to. You have your moments with them where you need to hammer them, but to their credit, are usually quite willing to call in and make comment on stories.
And what's the earliest time you've ever had a politician on the phone to your newsroom?
Well before 5 o'clock. There'll be times where mainly the opposition from either side of politics will have called in before 5 o'clock already. And, I mean, that's going on me coming in and knowing the stuff's in the can. Whether or not they're called in at 3 in the morning, I have no idea. But remember when I was doing the evening shifts once, and, I didn't get out till 1 in the morning one time because of a pretty big story in State Parliament. And as I was leaving, the phone was still going from people calling in to give reactions. So it's a 24-hour newsroom for a reason, because you never know what's going to happen.
Joel, a couple of quick things from me. During your time in radio, lots of stations are experimenting with webcams, and I think 2GB did a lot of that, and I think they've still got a couple of different studio cams with different angles. Have you ever presented the news for the webcam? We don't have webcams in the newsroom. I'm not sure why exactly. You'd have to ask my boss about that. But there was an experiment actually when I started. They created this. They wanted to create this multimedia site for 2GB and have us, read a 2-minute bulletin where they would have the newsreader in front of the prompter and have overlay, certain news stories and things like that. And I did it when I first started here, and I can tell you that it was a spectacular failure, because within about 3 or 4 months of that going onto the website, they were taken down. It was just too resource intensive, not to mention the fact that my mug was on TV as well, and that was an issue in itself. So they haven't really experimented with that from the news side of things. I think they're still trying to keep it fairly simple. I know that some of the television stations have got webcams in their newsroom, etc. But for us, at least, it's being kept just to the presenter studios. Yeah. And early on, I guess, when during your days as an intern, and you would have been doing all sorts of hours. Now you're, an established newsreader. You're the A team. Are there shifts at news reading shifts at a radio station that nobody really wants to do? What's the sort of time slots they always have trouble getting volunteers for?
Look, I think you'd have to say the overnights. We're lucky at 2GB that everyone who comes to work for us as a full-time employee, and they're under no illusions that there will be times where they will need to work overnights, etc. And that's just the nature of the beast. You work at a commercial radio station that's 24 hours. You're going to have to do some shifts that are overnight. That is still the nasty one, though. But I can promise you that most of our overnighters, they get in at they start about 10, 9:30, 10, leave by 6. Yeah. When I started at 2GB, the overnight shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 9 in the morning the following day. So a 10-hour shift. We had to work right through breakfast. And I can tell you, that was a killer. That was the one shift. If you got into that, you're in big trouble, because there is just nothing that you can do. You leave feeling like a zombie. You can't sleep, and at the same time you've got to back up and do a 10-hour shift the following day, and you're thinking, my God, how am I going to get through this? But thankfully they've changed it now, and it's a little bit more user-friendly. But I'm sure, I don't think there would be too many in radio that would disagree that the overnight shift is still the nasty one out of all of them.
Now, we heard at the start of the podcast in your chat with your mum and Ray Hadley, we heard that you're going to go to New York. Tell us what's the next chapter in your life, and what would you like to achieve over the next few years?
No, to be honest with you, I think the next chapter is just about challenging myself. I've always wanted to work overseas, and New York just kind of fell into my mind within the last 6 months or so. Before it was somewhere like London, or even I've always wanted to work out of Jerusalem. I have some family there and have been there many times before, and have always wanted to do something to do with the Middle East. But New York just struck me as this buzzing metropolis where anything can happen. And with all the major networks there, from CBS to CNN, Al Jazeera, etc., it just seems like the perfect place to go. As for me, I don't have a job lined up over there. This will be a good test, because I haven't gone out and actually hit the pound the pavement and press the flesh before, and trying to land a job. It'll be like going back to the early days here. But it's something that I want to do, and I want to put myself to the challenge to see if I can achieve it, because to make it there would be great. The intention is, of course, to come back at some point, but to get experience over there would be invaluable, especially at a major network. And just think of what you can achieve there as well. There are so many different avenues that you can go down. It just seems like an opportunity too good to miss.
And as a freelancer, you're going to make yourself available to all forms of media, are you?
Oh, very much so, especially back in Australia as well. The intention is, of course, to work for a US company, but that could be some time away. And even if that was the case as a freelancer, if anything happens and the Australian stations wanted to use me, I'm available. Basically, I'm trying to market myself here, but that is essentially what a freelancer is. I've never done that before. I've always been pretty set in my ways, so this will be a great little experiment to see whether or not anyone wants to take me on, or whether or not I can market myself like I should.
All right, Joel, look, thanks for talking to us today. It's been great hearing your story, hearing about your time at 2GB, and what your sort of dreams are, mate, about what might happen next. So, look, all the best, and thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on, boys. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for taking such an interest in my work and what 2GB does as well.
Congratulations, mate, on your time at 2GB. It's been very good. It's you surprised me. I got a shock when I met you at Darling Harbour a few years ago about how young you were. And what's your Twitter name if people want to follow you on online or contact you?
At JOELLABI. That is my Twitter handle, and I'm sure if you look me up on LinkedIn or Facebook, you'll probably come across as a great mugshot of me somewhere. if anyone's friends with either of you guys, I'm sure you'll be able to track me down easily.
Good on you. Thank you.
This has been a Media Week podcast produced with the assistance of abesaudio.com.au. To find more of these podcasts, go to MediaWeekPodcasts.com or search for us on iTunes or Facebook. Don't forget to check out our magazine at mediaweek.com.au or download our Media Week iPad app and get 3 months free.